In the war-torn Middle East, a mysterious man in yellow robes appears, calling himself the Messiah. His words ignite a movement known as the New Advent, drawing desperate crowds who see him as a savior. But is he a divine messenger, or a dangerous fraud threatening the fragile balance of world powers? For 85 days, Damascus has been under brutal siege. Food and water are gone, death rains from the sky, and hope is nearly extinguished. Two orphaned teenagers, Jabril and Samir, roam the shattered streets when they encounter the stranger. Calm and unwavering amid chaos, he promises that the city will not fall, that God has already decreed its salvation. Moments later, a violent sandstorm engulfs the battlefield, cutting off enemy supply lines and forcing the besieging forces to retreat. Damascus is saved. Across the world, FBI agent Eva Geller studies the broadcast of this miracle. Her attention is drawn to the enigmatic man, now known among the people as Al-Masih. Soon, she discovers that he is leading hundreds of followers deep into the desert. Around the campfires at night, he challenges them with piercing questions about faith, morality, and destiny, demanding they think deeply about their own beliefs. Jabril recalls hearing him preach while they hid from shelling, and now the Messiah calls him forward, telling the boy that every soul has its own star, and that God has chosen him for a mission yet to come. Eva begins to dig deeper, tracing his every move. After a 65-kilometer trek through the scorching desert, Al-Masih's followers reach the Israeli border. Some think he has led them to fight, but he shocks them by ordering every weapon buried. He then calmly steps across the barbed wire fence and is immediately arrested. Israeli agent Aviram Dahan is deeply shaken during his interrogation of Al-Masih, the man who claims to be a messenger of God. When Al-Masih reminds him of a haunting incident from his past, one involving a young boy, Aviram is left reeling. After the interrogation, he abruptly destroys the video recording, hiding the evidence. Haunted by memories, he confronts his partner to ask if he has told anyone about what really happened in the desert, but his partner refuses to speak. Driving home, Aviram is jolted by a terrifying hallucination. A man with a bag over his head suddenly appears in the back seat of his car, a flashback to a tragedy that continues to torment him. By dawn, he is back at work, only to discover that Al-Masih has somehow escaped from Israeli custody without a trace. Meanwhile, in the quiet town of Dilley, Texas, local preacher Felix Aguero delivers a hopeful sermon to his congregation. Back at the FBI, agents decide that this mysterious man's influence has become too great to ignore. To uncover the truth, Special Agent Eva Geller is sent to Israel. When Eva arrives, Aviram is called in to explain why he erased the interrogation footage. Defensive and combative, he refuses to justify himself to the American agent, resenting her intrusion into what he considers his jurisdiction. Tension is rising worldwide. The hundreds of refugees Al-Masih led to the Israeli border are now starving in the desert but refuse to leave, convinced that he will return to them. Humanitarian volunteers arrive with food and water, but the camp erupts with excitement when they discover that Al-Masih has indeed escaped custody. Not long after, Al-Masih appears in Jerusalem, standing on the Temple Mount, and begins preaching before a massive crowd. His words are ominous, warning of the end of history and calling on those who are ready for God's judgment to step forward. A young boy does so, but before the moment can unfold, Israeli police storm the site to arrest Al-Masih. The chaos turns deadly when a shot rings out, striking the boy. Panic spreads through the crowd as they chase away the police, but what happens next shocks everyone. Al-Masih kneels, places his hands on the child, and the boy miraculously rises, holding up the bloody bullet. To the people, this is nothing short of divine proof. But before authorities can react, Al-Masih vanishes into the crowd. Eva hears the news over the radio and races to the scene. In the meantime, Muslim clerics voice their anger at Al-Masih's unorthodox interpretation of Allah's will, fueling further unrest. His followers at the border begin to lose hope, unable to understand why the man they see as a modern-day prophet would abandon them. Eva, determined to get answers, studies hours of CCTV footage and notices something strange. Al-Masih seems to disappear without explanation. She also discovers she's being followed. Her pursuer is none other than Aviram, who warns her to stop digging into something she doesn't understand. But Eva refuses to back down. As protests erupt in Jerusalem and authorities cut the power to restore order, Eva continues her relentless search for the boy who was shot, and for the truth about the man who might be a savior or a threat that could set the entire world on fire. The search for the boy who was shot on the Temple Mount leads Eva and the Israeli agents to his home. But it is empty. His terrified family has fled, overwhelmed by the unwanted attention of the crowds who believe their son is a living miracle. News footage of the incident spreads across the globe, sparking heated debates about faith, politics, and the nature of miracles. In Texas, Pastor Felix Aguero watches the broadcast with growing unease, while his teenage daughter Rebecca secretly dreams of running away from home. Meanwhile, back at the refugee camp, Jabril notices a mysterious flickering light near the border fence and follows it. At the same time, Eva uncovers a photo of Al-Masih taken in Jordan, confirming his movements. Palestinian girls arrive at the camp with food and promise to help the starving people. But when Jabril leaves to seek more assistance, he is ambushed, struck in the head, and taken away from the fence by an unknown man. That same night, Rebecca follows through with her plan to escape. Her father, despairing over his failing faith and dwindling congregation, decides to burn his church to the ground. He grabs a can of gasoline and a lighter and heads toward the building, unaware that a deadly tornado is heading straight for the town. His wife sees the alert on his phone and rushes to find him as tornado sirens begin to wail. Residents of Dili race to the only shelter available, the very church Felix planned to destroy. As the tornado closes in, Felix desperately calls Rebecca, hoping she is nearby. Then, to his astonishment, he spots a calm, motionless figure standing in the storm, Al-Masih. When the skies clear, the town lies in ruins, except for the church, which remains miraculously untouched. Soon, a video of Rebecca's rescue begins to circulate on social media, but CIA operatives intercept it and shut it down before it spreads too far. News of the miracle draws the attention of federal agent Will Mathers, who travels to Dili. He is stunned by the devastation, and even more so by the fact that Al-Masih is there, standing calmly among the survivors. When asked how he arrived in America, Al-Masih simply answers that he came by God's will. Felix, humbled and shaken, realizes that the building he wanted to destroy ended up saving everyone's lives. But the moment of wonder is short-lived. Agent Will arrests Al-Masih on the spot. Determined to free him, Pastor Felix hires a lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union, convinced that none of this was coincidence. Meanwhile, Aviram interrogates Jabril, desperately seeking clues to Al-Masih's movements. The boy insists he knows nothing. Aviram's frustration grows. He cannot understand why so many people would blindly follow a man with no past, no identity, and no proof of his claims. He vows to expose Al-Masih as a fraud and prove that God does not exist. Back in Texas, Al-Masih's lawyer informs him that while the charge of illegal entry into the U.S. will likely stand, she can at least get him released from the Federal Immigration Detention Center. But before she can do so, CIA officer Eva Geller, still determined to uncover the truth, arrives to question him. During their tense exchange, Al-Masih turns the interrogation around, revealing personal details about Eva's own life, including the painful losses of her mother and husband, and leaving her shaken. Once again, the enigmatic man has shifted the balance of power, turning a federal investigation into something far more personal. After his chilling conversation with CIA officer Eva Geller, Al-Masih reflects on the burden of his growing influence. He acknowledges his responsibility to those who follow him and expresses his willingness to help all who suffer, even Eva herself. But Eva remains skeptical, dismissing his words as manipulation, and leaves the room without realizing that a recording device has captured their entire conversation. Back in her hotel, Eva receives word from her superiors. Israel is formally demanding Al-Masih's extradition, and the state prosecutor is preparing to seek approval for his transfer. Soon, Al-Masih is brought before a U.S. court. Calm and collected, he admits to the charges against him, but then shocks the courtroom by requesting asylum. Eva tries to pressure his attorney into dropping the case, arguing that extradition is inevitable and will save everyone from a political firestorm. But the lawyer refuses to back down. Meanwhile, Aviram is once again confronted about the erased interrogation footage and, refusing to cooperate, is officially suspended from the investigation. Far away, Pastor Felix tells his wife that he must leave, that he is being called to serve the Messiah. Crowds of Almasiah's followers gather outside the courthouse as the hearing begins. The defense argues passionately that if Almasi is returned to Israel, he will face persecution and imprisonment for religious reasons. The prosecution counters by claiming Almasi is no Muslim at all, pointing out that he does not follow the prescribed rituals, such as praying 5 times daily. Almasi stands and delivers a quiet but electrifying response. "I belong to no single faith, for all men walk under the same sun." His words ignite a firestorm of debate around the world, from the streets of Jerusalem to the halls of government in Washington. Behind the scenes, the White House chief of staff pressures the judge to deport him. But the next day, in a stunning decision, the court grants asylum to Almasi. He walks free, met outside by Pastor Felix, whose car is waiting to take him to Dili. The world is now captivated. Pilgrims flood the tiny Texas town seeking miracles and healing. Felix tries to organize shelter for them, while Samir tends to the injured Jibril, who still refuses medical treatment, convinced that faith alone will heal him. Almasi isolates himself in a tent on the edge of town, seeing only Felix. When Felix asks about the future, the man simply replies that he does not know what comes next. After all, it was Felix who brought him here. The answer shakes Felix's faith, leaving him disillusioned. Meanwhile, Agent Will shows Eva a book by radical thinker Jonathan Wallace, whose writings about cultural terrorism contain phrases Almasi has used word for word. The revelation suggests that the supposed holy man is following a plan to destabilize global order. Back at the camp, Samir and Jibril argue. Samir accuses his friend of fanaticism and calls him crazy for refusing treatment despite his worsening injuries. In Israel, Aviram's wife notices that his car has been parked near their home for days and goes searching for him, just as Aviram himself travels to Texas and buys a gun. That night, he approaches Almasiah's tent, ready to pull the trigger. But when their eyes meet, Aviram falters. The man he came to kill simply looks back at him, calm and fearless. Aviram lowers the gun, shaken, as Almasi walks past him toward town. Soon after, tragedy strikes when a family discovers their dog crushed under debris from the hurricane. They beg Almasi to save it. Instead, he takes the gun and mercifully puts the animal down, an act of compassion that horrifies the boy, who turns on him in anger. Almasi quietly leaves town. Eva catches up with Aviram, who admits he wanted to kill the Messiah. Meanwhile, Almasi calls Rebecca, Felix's daughter, and asks her to come with him. At the border camp, the refugees believe they have been abandoned and begin to disperse, but Jibril stays behind. In a dream, he sees his dead mother, who transforms into Almasi and reaches for him. In Dili, the situation grows tense. Police urge pilgrims to leave the ruined town, and angry locals vandalize the church walls, calling Almasi a fraud. Eva finally uncovers Almasiah's true identity. Payam Galshari, an Iranian man with a brother who works at a university. Convinced this is destiny, Almasi tells Felix that it's time to move on. Felix gathers his family and leads a caravan of followers down the road. More and more cars join, turning it into a massive convoy, hundreds strong. Eva also returns to Texas to follow the column. One night, she sees Almasi step out to use a payphone and requests a transcript of the call. The caravan heads toward Washington, D.C. Social media posts reveal their destination, alarming U.S. authorities. At the same time, Eva discovers that Almasi once studied at the same university where Wallace taught before hacking the stock exchange and fleeing to Moscow, making Almasiah's actions look like part of a carefully orchestrated plot. When the convoy finally reaches the capital, Almasi stands at the Lincoln Memorial and addresses the crowd, delivering a haunting speech about unity and the end of time. Jibril, far away, seems to hear him and strips off his clothes in a moment of total surrender. Almasi walks toward the water. Jibril walks toward the border, where soldiers block his path and aim their rifles. As the world watches through live streams, Al-Masih steps onto the surface of the water and walks, and the Israeli soldiers retreat. Jibril crosses the border, leading the refugees to freedom. The world erupts in chaos and awe. Some hail these events as miracle. The man reluctantly agrees to take the girl, but only if they go alone. What he doesn't realize is that his every move is being monitored under 24-hour surveillance. Meanwhile, the young refugees begin their education, and religion takes center stage. Sheikh personally visits Jibril to test the boy's faith, and Jibril, without hesitation, declares that he truly believes in the Messiah. Elsewhere, Eva sits down with Aviram, discussing the miraculous moment when the Messiah walked on water. She compares him to Jesus, saying he too performed tricks that drew crowds and gained followers. Surprisingly, Aviram is impressed. He tells her she speaks like a true Jew, and perhaps for the first time, they find a moment of understanding. Back at the facility, Agent Will continues watching the Messiah's every move through the surveillance cameras. One day, a girl knocks on Al-Masih's door, begging for healing. But as soon as she enters, her true motive is revealed. She was sent there to seduce him. Instead of falling for the trap, Al-Masih speaks to her with compassion, exposing her pain and the life she's been forced to live. His words pierce through her hardened heart. The girl breaks down, confessing she was paid to do this, and begins to cry as the Messiah tells her that God's eternal love is meant for all his children. Watching the entire exchange through the cameras, Agent Will is moved to tears. Not far away, Rebecca runs out of her parents' room and sees the girl leaving Al-Masih's quarters. She looks on, curious. As the girl runs off into the street, the Messiah follows her and catches up, speaking gently about the special place he has reserved for her in his mission. The girl admits she feels like the world is standing on the edge of something monumental. Al-Masih looks into her eyes and asks her to do something unimaginable. Rebecca, without hesitation, promises she will do whatever he asks. Meanwhile, the CIA digs into Al-Masih's past and finds his brother. The man reveals that their parents were of different faiths and died young, leaving the boys to be raised by their uncle, a strict but talented illusionist. It was he who taught Al-Masih literacy, languages, and the art of performance. From a young age, Al-Masih loved being the center of attention. But then someone ambushes Al-Masih, putting a dark bag over his head. When it's removed, he finds himself standing in the office of the President of the United States. Calmly but firmly, he demands the withdrawal of all American troops from every foreign country. The President is stunned. Such a move, he says, would lead to chaos. America's military presence is meant to maintain peace. But Al-Masih counters by listing every nation and city where U.S. forces have brought war instead of peace. He tells the president that he has the chance to go down in history as a true peacemaker, someone who could save the world. History is ending, he warns. The world is about to begin anew. Eva's investigation leads her to discover that a few years earlier, Al-Masih had been admitted to a psychiatric clinic. She visits the college he once attended, but the director remembers nothing extraordinary, only that his thesis was once considered controversial. When Eva checks the archives, the paper is mysteriously missing. Meanwhile, in Jordan, Sheikh shows Jibril a newspaper filled with stories of the Messiah's miracles. He tells the boy he must deliver a speech at the upcoming celebration. Jibril must rise as a leader of the new generation in the fight for Palestinian independence. The next day, Al-Masih announces to the media that he has met with the president, infuriating Reverend Felix, who feels betrayed for being kept in the dark. Even the president faces backlash from his advisors, but he insists on meeting Al-Masih personally again. At their second meeting, the Messiah refuses to talk politics until the president considers the suffering of the people. Reverend Felix, still reeling from the news, confronts Al-Masih angrily. But the Messiah only asks him to prove his faith. If he truly believes, he must kneel. Felix hesitates, left in deep thought as Al-Masih walks away. Agent Will, now completely convinced that Al-Masih is genuine, resigns from his job. Eva receives the call logs she had requested, deepening her investigation. That same night, Aviram confronts Al-Masih, mocking him and challenging him to walk on water again. But El-Masih simply smiles and asks a question of his own. Why haven't you left yet? Aviram has no answer. Soon after, the president meets El-Masih once more. The Messiah tells him there is no time left to deliberate. Suddenly, water begins to rise and flood the president's feet. When he wakes, he learns that a massive, unprecedented flood has destroyed much of the U.S. coastline. Meanwhile, Reverend Felix's daughter confesses that El-Masih came to Texas not for her father, but for her. In Jerusalem, a prison guard steps forward and confesses that he, not Aviram, was the one who freed the Messiah. That same night, the girl who had been sent by the president's assistant to seduce El-Masih returns all the money she was given. She says she doesn't care whether he's a prophet or a fraud. All she knows is that he is a good man. The president, shaken by the disaster, flies over the flooded regions, providing aid and urging the people to keep praying. Back with the Agueros, Felix's wife asks El-Masih why he chose their family. The Messiah simply replies that faith can be found anywhere, and that he wants what God wants, the flood. In Jordan, Jibril struggles to memorize the words of the speech the sheikh is forcing him to deliver. His friends, too, are being heavily Indo.